Get these calls, and we always try to get ahead of it because we have to prepare. You should be. If you're an officer that's not, and you roll up to a call with your head up your ass, you probably should find another profession, and because you're just rolling the dice and getting ready to get your handed to you.
What's interesting is that on the body camera of one of the female officers that's there towards the end, the child says to the female officer, "He was trying to steal me."
And did the chief see that?
He didn't even know that.
Oh my God.
He did not even know that.
How does he not understand the severity of the whole situation?
So that goes to the totality of the circumstances.
Your take on this whole situation here, and from what we know about the chief not being informed of all of the facts based on the totality of the circumstances, going in, almost fabricating, and I believe it is a fabrication of a charge of excessive force to fire this officer on because he didn't get the result from the initial two charges. They asked for an extension, and during that extension is when they throw the excessive force, which, actually just adds more drama to that allegation. Why do you think this chief did that? Is it ignorance? Is it ineptitude? Is he managing by paranoia that he's going to get berated by the anti-police crybabies? What is it?
Blu Wolf Podcast.
The following is a continuation of a previous podcast titled Officer Vargas's Response. In it, Willie and David go over the event that occurred in November of 2019 involving Officer Andre Vargas and the resulting fallout surrounding the event. Today, Willie sits down with Attorney Ben Sifuentes to discuss the obstacles and inner workings of the arbitration case as he represented Officer Vargas. This episode of the Blu Wolf Podcast is brought to you by Blue Line Professional Inspections. Check out blproinspections.com or call 210-771-8831 for all your inspection needs, including home inspection, wood-destroying insect inspection, sewer drain inspection, and on-site water treatment inspection. Blue Line is a first responder-owned business.
Hey, so Ben, thanks for coming. Thanks for joining the Blu Wolf Podcast and offering your time. I know you're a busy man.
Well, Willie, I want to thank you so much for having me here. It means a lot to me that you have asked me to speak on these issues, and I'm very, very honored to be here.
No, and why wouldn't I? I mean, you are you were at the helm of this hearing that involved Officer Vargas and the arbitration hearing against the city. How long have you been an attorney?
Over 40 years.
Over 40 years. And so you and I have known each other for, I wanted to say 30, but I don't think it's quite that long. Maybe now it is. I'm thinking of my career. Maybe now it is. Okay. But I want to say that I've known of Ben since just right after I got on the department in 1989. His name was always around, especially in conversations about officers, arbitration hearings, disciplinary type of investigations and things like that. It was if there was a list of officers that were recommended to other officers that needed an attorney, Ben Sifuentes was on it. And then I mentioned with David Sapansky that how quick you were, and I don't even know if you remember it. One fiesta, I got accused of something that I wasn't even around. Not to get into the story, but I was alleged to have struck some female at a fiesta event, and it took me by surprise because I just remember not being involved in anything that night whatsoever. But it was serious enough that when I got to the office the next day, homicide sergeant and the detective are waiting for me to take a statement. I was advised not to speak to them as much as I knew them, and they understood. And then I called you because your name has been one of the main ones up there, and you stepped up right away, and we met pretty quickly. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
Yeah, and we even had some witnesses come in. We met kind of at a table like this, started getting the ball rolling on the investigation, only for it to be killed, the whole case and investigation be killed in like 2 days,
Right.
Because I believe the complainant retracted her allegation, And what it turned out to be was I was the only one she could recognize out of a group of people. So she threw my name out as having done something when no one actually did it anyway. Again, it's a long story, but my whole point is that I've known you for a while. You've even said that you knew my dad. You used to go by his shop on the south side.
That's correct.
Funny as it may be, this case involves the situation on the south side, right?
Right.
The south side of town in San Antonio, Texas. And by now, obviously, the public has seen the outcome of this case, right? It's been in the news.
That's correct. And the comments on those websites that do take comments have been overwhelmingly in support of the officers.
On the site or just?
Well, on KSAT, everybody was supportive of the officers.
Okay.
And I don't know if you recall when the movie about gangs came out, Colors, there was a lot of shootings on the east side. I don't know if you remember that. And the chief of police decided to saturate the east side with every available police unit, bike patrol, foot patrol, SCAT, SWAT, DWI, motorcycle, you name it. And the news media went out there. And when the media went out there, I thought it was very patently obvious they were expecting people, when they were knocking on the doors, to say how terrible it was. But overwhelmingly, every single person that answered the door said, oh, they love it.
That the officers were there.
That the officers were there because their kids could play in the front yard and go to the park. So what people oftentimes misunderstand, that's very apparent to me, is it doesn't matter what economic class you're from. People want good police protection. And former Chief Ortiz, Albert Ortiz, told me many times, and this is after he retired, that when police are called, they are called because somebody wants them there. And that's an important situation in this particular arbitration, which we will get into. But police are pretty much held in high regard in this city.
I believe it. For now.
Yes.
I mean, I think what you're saying right there is, I think it's, well, I'm not saying that they don't want us around. They're wanting us around even more so, but what's happening with law enforcement is that we, and again, I'm retired, still active somewhere else, but I'm speaking on behalf of the officers because I talk to them all the time. I hear their sentiments and their concerns lately. They understand that, because they got into this job to usually a thrill seeker. You know what I mean? At least I was, and then I became more of one as I got in. But now these guys just don't want to get involved in anything anymore. Nothing that I found fun and that they might find fun because of what's happened, and particularly this case that we're about to talk about. These officers, and particularly one officer to start with, was doing exactly what you just said the public wants of it.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Responded to a call for service. And you brought up the east side, which is predominantly black, African American, and south side is predominant. It was, Art Lindley, now retired Sergeant Art Lindley, said that south side is predominantly Hispanic, which we know.
And the city as a whole, Willie, and I'm sure you know, is probably about, depending on which demographics of the census you believe, is anywhere between 63% to 67% Hispanic.
Yeah.
And Hispanics in this community are a diverse group of people economically and socially, but the department as a whole, except in management, reflects the diversity of the community.
Sure. And the reason we're mentioning, and for those that are listening to wonder where we're getting at with race here, because this decision that the chief made on this officer's job, his livelihood, his profession, his passion, because he was a good officer, had to have been made due to the George Floyd effect. And we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. So Ben, you were we've seen the award that and all the summaries of what the arbitrator said about the chief's action. I don't want to get too far, but I kind of want to break down some of the things that really struck out in my mind after reading the transcripts and things like that. One of the biggest things that I saw was they asked for an extension of the 180-day rule by contract, right? 45-day extension. Was that correct?
I believe that's what it was. I was not involved in that, but
right. You were not the attorney. A plea attorney was there, right?
Correct.
Okay.
But I can address whatever questions you have about that because the plea attorney did show up and testify about that.
Who is now retired?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, and after reading the transcripts and the going back and forth from the city attorney, or the attorney representing the city, I won't mention his name or her name. I don't know. Was it he or her?
Well, the city attorneys, assistant city attorneys were male and female.
Okay. So they were going back and forth, almost like they did not want to get the true reason for the 45-day extension, is what I saw. They were objecting, interrupting you as you're trying to talk, accusing you of leading, also being too broad about certain things. But my understanding is, and the attorney at the time, the plea attorney, was that they asked for a 45-day extension due to COVID, right? Because it was right around the COVID time.
That's correct. And we introduced memorandum showing that the card, which is the meeting that's required before the chief rules.
What's that stand for?
I think it stands for Citizens Action Review Board.
Okay.
They had been scheduled within the allotted 180-day time frame, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, IA was still located in the Washington Square building on 800, I believe it was De La Rosa. And so the fourth floor conference room was too small for social distancing. And
which we know now.
And so there was actually a memo that went out that said that because of the need for social distancing, they wanted to reschedule it to a new location. And we had a former deputy chief testified in support of that. And so the lead attorney testified consistent with that fact, that this is the reason for the delay. And what the city did was they added a new charge and voted twice on what charge to add against Officer Vargas.
What were the initial two charges?
I believe the initial charge was language, and the second was how the officers lifted the suspect off the ground.
Treatment of prisoners.
Yes.
Was the broad.
So it was 3.04, conduct unbecoming, and I believe 3.26, which was prisoners.
Okay. And so when the attorney, what I saw, the CLEAT attorney, he agreed to it under the understanding that it was only going to be, needing further time to investigate or work out only these two charges, right?
Well, the reality is it wasn't to add new charges. It was to permit the city to accomplish social distancing.
Okay. But still, and they were going back and forth, almost like he shouldn't have had an expectation that it was just those 2 charges.
Right.
Right.
And then the city added the 3rd charge afterwards.
Right. Which is what got him
But the important
fired. Right?
but the important thing that you should know, Willie, is that the CARB met twice. The first
That I saw.
time they met, the 3rd charge was not there.
That I saw.
And the chief did not like the result of the CARB deciding not to terminate the officer or recommending termination.
Based on the 2 charges.
That's correct. So he wanted it reinvestigated to add a 3rd charge because he already made up his mind, no doubt, that he was going to fire him, and he needed a pretext or basis to justify the termination.
So what did I see? Because now you're going a little bit further in detail than what I know. So he expected them on those 2 charges that we just stated, the language and the treatment of prisoners. He expected the CARB to have recommended termination.
I don't know what he expected the CARB to do. I can't say that, but he did not like what the CARB recommended. And what's important to know is that the 2 charges that the CARB voted on the first time were actually factually untrue. And let me cover that.
Yes.
The first charge, language, they cited language that Vargas used prior to putting him under arrest.
Okay.
Everybody testified that language was appropriate under the use of force continuum or the use of force matrix, whichever language you want to call it, under Procedure 501. And
to affect the objective, to speak their language and
to
affect the arrest.
In fact, the chief talks about it in one of his videos. He calls it verbal judo, and that's acceptable.
We have been teaching de-escalation tactics for several years now. We just call it by another name. For instance, verbal judo.
And so everybody testified that was okay. And that's what was alleged in the suspension paperwork, and that was what was alleged in the allegations, his language prior to arrest. So what the city oftentimes does is they give notice of what they're firing for, but then when they can't prove it, they change it during the hearing. So during the hearing, they cited language after the arrest.
Okay. Because it sounds better.
Well, because there's no doubt that the Officer Vargas, and he admitted it during the hearing because he was truthful, that there was language after arrest that he
probably shouldn't have used. Yeah.
Because the objective had been accomplished. But by the same token, the arbitrator realized that the suspect, and we can go into everything that he did prior to the arrest, had really instigated and charged up the situation. And
Sure.
one of the things, Willie, if you allow me to, is one of the things that I've often said to people is that I use the metaphor when you're a police officer and you're going 150 miles an hour and you're expected to brake and stop before a certain point in time. If you go past that point in time, a couple of inches or a couple of yards, my attitude is, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
It's not as if you
can't stop on a dime.
You can't stop on a dime.
Yeah.
You didn't do it on purpose. You didn't do it intentionally. You didn't do it to violate someone's rights.
Sure.
So in this situation, I think the arbitrator recognized that this situation was charged up, and yes, officers were supposed to be well trained and control their emotions, but it's unreasonable to expect an officer to stop on a dime. And what she noted, Willie, was that the language stopped almost immediately,
Mm-hmm.
and when the suspect had a chance to calm down, it was kind of comical. that he wanted to apologize to Vargas for insulting him.
And they both did.
And they both, and you know, they
Fist bump.
yeah, they fist bumped.
Well, he was handcuffed. Yeah.
And if somebody goes, bro, you know,
Yeah.
it's
He wanted to shake his hand, but he was handcuffed. Is
right.
what I remember that saying.
It's a way of basically acknowledging, hey, I messed up. I apologize. And you know, next time when we meet on the street, and we do this, you know, just cooperate, and I'll give you a break, because what they could have arrested him for, they didn't. They actually arrested him for evading arrest because he didn't cooperate.
Yeah.
So, you know, he could have avoided the situation. The suspect could have avoided all the drama had he simply stopped and pulled over right away.
And see, that's what people don't understand, and that's and it's something that gets labeled on the officer on situations like this, especially if the media gets a hold of it. It labels this officer as, number one, being excessive and aggressive, as if that's him all the time, all the way. 24, you know, every time he's on duty, he's that way. Same way with racism. That's what they tried to pull things. I'll say, I've been reading a book about from the officer that was shot in the Breonna Taylor incident. That had nothing to do with race, other than she was of a certain race and he was of a certain race. It had everything to do with a lawful performance of his duties, but somehow it blew up to be racial, you know. And in this situation, with this officer, we go up, and I can't speak other than viewing his actions, someone else's actions, because I've been in those positions too. I get up, and then at some point you got to come down. And something else that I wanted to say, when we talk about arrest, because we believe that once they're in handcuffs, they're under arrest. He was under arrest when the officer spotted him, because he had committed he was being detained
Right.
at the time. Now, his violation was taking off when he was right. That's the evading arrest. When he took off and the officer had his overhead lights to pull in behind him, that's when he is under arrest and he is no longer free to leave. He's just not in custody yet.
So I guess the best way for me to respond to that is that everybody fails to understand what the Supreme Court case of Terry v. Ohio says. And Terry v. Ohio is a Supreme Court case that says that when you see suspicious activity afoot that a reasonable officer should investigate, he can conduct a temporary detention to investigate and then decide. So he had the right to do the detention, and the reason, and maybe we can digress to what brought this all about was there's a document called an IDR or key card that documented that at least 7 citizens on the South Side called in requesting police assistance.
Calling 911.
Right. So when people on the South Side want to get involved to assist a fellow citizen, that in itself should tell you need to take action. Sure. And the details on the key card were that a man was screaming at a woman trying to take a child away. And so when you get repeated calls, that indicates anxiety and fear on the part of the citizens that, hey, somebody needs to respond to this. Because you know how it is that sometimes people on the street will say, well, I don't need to call because someone else already called.
Sure.
But when you have several people call, that means that, you know, I don't know if anyone else called, but this is pretty serious.
Sure.
We need to get this attended to.
Yeah.
So,
and that depending, what time of night was that? Do you remember?
I know it was dark.
Okay.
I know it was dark. I don't remember the time.
Yeah.
But
that area is at that time, and I want to say it was definitely. Well, maybe it's not frequented as much. There.
And I don't know if you want to have me explain why, and this gets into the totality of the circumstances, but If you want, I can explain a series of events as to why it was important for this officer to take action.
No, we talked about all that. Me and Dave went over that, and you're saying exactly what we've been saying. The analogy used of stomping on a dime there. I said that in talking with Dave. And I've been saying that with any kind of other police action, because I can't believe that we're at this point in 2024 and people are still so ignorant about police action.
Well,
and the justified uses of force, to include management of the police department.
One of the things that the arbitrator noted, and which came out, is that Officer Vargas went to where the key card said the disturbance was located.
We talked about that too, and didn't find anything.
He could have encoded the call.
Sure.
Took it off.
A lot of lazy officers would have done it.
Yeah, but Officer Sendejo testified that it was commendable that he kept searching.
And Sendejo is an internal affairs sergeant.
Right, and he's Hispanic.
Right. Yeah, and we talked about him, but not too much, because what I believe, and I can say it now, I don't care, it wasn't him that pushed the issue. He's a sergeant. He was a sergeant at the time. I don't know what he is now, but from what it sounded like, and just from what I'm reading, and just from what I've heard people know about, it wasn't him that pushed the issue. He had to have gotten further.
Yes,
urging.
I agree with that 100%, and I can tell you why.
Yeah, tell me.
So, my observations during the hearing were during breaks. He would go out in the hallway and he would be bent over as if someone had killed his puppy or something, and was very upset that he was having to testify the way he was. And what's interesting
in the hearing?
Yes, and what's interesting is that when we questioned him about things that exonerated Vargas, he went around, he backed us up immediately. Like, one of the things was mistreatment of prisoners. The video shows that Vargas assisted this individual to his feet, and the individual placed his feet underneath him and stood up immediately and spun around and was threatening to the officers.
Even that allegation was totally off kilter. It wasn't even subject to interpretation, right?
Right.
It was so obvious.
And so he designed a question to address that allegation, and it was question 8, and Vargas responded to it. And we asked Sendejo if, in reviewing his responses, it was clear to you that Vargas did not understand your question, you would have asked follow-up, but you didn't, because you accepted his answer and you believed he was truthful. And he explained that he assisted him up, and that's what happened. And so that allegation was found not to be true. Then they realized that they couldn't prove the allegation, and McManus said, he didn't assist him to his feet. He yanked him to his feet.
That's where that came from.
And so there's no evidence that he yanked him to his feet. Then they try to switch it to, well, after he spun around on him and they redirected him to the patrol car, that somehow or another they were jerking him around on the patrol car. And what McManus failed to understand was he was claiming that when the suspect was kicking at the officers, that was because they were pushing him on the patrol car. But Bobby Moreno and others testified that was an officer. That was a suspect doing what I call donkey kicks.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know what that is.
Yeah. Because his hands, he can't use his hands anymore, so he has his feet available.
So he was aggressively resisting kicking at the officers with his legs. And so what the officers did in that situation was used open-handed pain compliance techniques to get the person to comply.
Okay. Yeah, and so and that there's so much to come from that, because I've seen other situations, just not the whole call, but that situation where they have him handcuffed. And he starts being belligerent on his feet. Well, then, and I've done it before, the best place for you, because you can't act right on your feet, is to put you back down on your face and not drop them on their face, because obviously they don't have the use of their hands. sometimes they slip from people's grasp, which we've seen before, right?
Sure.
And they fall very hard. But again, then we can get in trouble for that. You guide them back down, put them in a prone position, and you get them. You can pat them down, search them, frisk them, whatever. Frisk them first, search them, whatever, and then get them. And sometimes, nowadays, because of the George Floyd situation, you have to put them in a position not directly on their chest, because all kinds of things can happen. Position asphyxiation. They can have that. I don't know. The heart can bust, whatever that syndrome's called.
Well, let me back up a little bit. The positional asphyxia, that has been something that people have been aware of.
Excited delirium.
Been aware of since the late 1990s, and I've represented officers on situations where people die because the suspect is in custody, they've struggled, and they're on drugs or other things, and then there's a death. So one of the things that has happened is that officers have been retrained and put them on their side. And what's disturbing to me about the Vargas case is there was none of that involved. Dr. Robert Bucks, a medical examiner, testified and said that the officers did what they were supposed to do by putting the suspect on the side, so there was no danger of positional asphyxia.
Yeah.
So to suggest that somehow or another this equated with George Floyd is absurd. Now, one of the things that
they are so deathly afraid of that, Ben. We have this video which will be attached in this podcast from the chief. But when I was still in, and I've been retired for a little over 2 years now, there were these consistent training videos that you had to watch, and the way they kept track was that they would see that you satisfied that requirement, so you had to watch them for a little while, and then whatever. And some, especially after the George Floyd incident, they had one where they're all role players, mind you, okay, and they're arresting a suspect, and he's a police officer, but he's acting like a suspect. They put him on his face, on his chest, and they get him handcuffed, and he's just kind of doing this. I mean, that's not really what a lot of them do. A lot of them keep their hands underneath them. You can't get them out from underneath them. Officer puts his leg, because they're kneeling down, his knee on this suspect's shoulder blade back here. And then there was a male and a female officer, and the female pushes his leg as she's on the other side trying to help him get this guy's hands behind him. She notices that he puts his leg on him, and she pushes it off of him. And then they get him handcuffed. And then the scene changes to them having coffee somewhere, dinner. And she says, "I hope you understand why I did that." No, it's total bullshit.
So one of the things that I do want to say before we conclude is that I would never give an opinion on a freeze frame of any video on any case, no matter where, because
there's so much more involved.
You have to look at the totality of circumstances, what proceeded to do, and to make a decision about what's appropriate or not appropriate based upon a fraction of a video can be very, very misleading and have unfair results.
Not just that. Let's say we have the whole video, but if we were going to go frame by frame by frame and stop it and go, "Did you see that?" Like, we're trying. I was on a case where they were like, well, they had every chance to get his hands behind him, but instead they kept hitting him, and they're showing frame by frame. This is in the court of law, and stop. And there's a hand in the frame. Did you see that? Why didn't you grab it?
Right.
And the officer's like, well, that's where my camera's looking. That's not where I'm looking.
And I'm sure I know that the United States Border Patrol, in their training videos, has videos of the Shreveport situation probably 15 or 20 years ago. And I don't know if you are familiar with that. It's probably still on YouTube, where two patrol cars converge upon a suspect in a convenience store. And in one front video, it appears that the officer shoots the suspect for no reason. And you think, oh my God, this is murder. Well, thank God that there was another camera rolling at a different angle, and you're aware of how a camera has a V cone of their field of view. The suspect was outside that field of view when he spun around and pointed a threatening object at the officers, crosses over, points a threatening object again, then moves perpendicular before the cone, showing a third instance where he's pointing a threatening object at the officers. But because of because there was a second patrol car that was able to capture that plane, the three threats were there. And when you see the second video, the reaction is, why didn't they shoot him sooner?
Right.
So you have to keep in mind that there's no such thing as cameras that have perfect recall of what happened.
Sure.
Because you can have a missing camera view, and also a lot of these cameras have less than the human eye. I'm not an expert in optics, but everybody knows what the fisheye effect is that has body cameras. So distances are distorted.
Well, there's also something that I've said about this. I worked most of my career without cameras, without body cameras, and what I would notice when I'd watch a camera, and obviously remembering, because of my experience, I was able to recall a lot more. I wasn't losing my mind under stress. The cameras, no matter how good they are, they don't pick up smell. They don't pick up little nuances of what indicate stress or pre-violence indicators. Like I've seen hearts beating through their t-shirts that make they're so amped up. You can see their t-shirt moving, carotid arteries almost busting out of their neck, twitches of their lip that are indicators that I see this dude is getting ready to do something. And obviously movements of the eyes and things like that. And especially if it's low light. So and I used to exploit those. The camera doesn't show it, but this is what I saw and I document it because we get to watch the cameras. But in those situations, when you talk about the totality of the circumstances, and what that incident you just described right there, you have to take in all those accounts. And if you have all these things available to you to watch them, Graham versus Connor is, to me, the most significant case involved in excessive uses of force. You have to view it through the eyes of the officer at that time based on the totality of the circumstances of what he knew. And the totality of the circumstances isn't just the details of the incident, it's also his frame of mind. Is that correct?
That's correct. And what's interesting is Chief McManus acknowledged that in taser training, reluctantly acknowledged that in taser training they teach Graham versus Connor.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I read?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I had asked him about what Vargas was taught in the academy, and I said, okay, and would you agree that the author of the taser training, and I had the taser manual, said that you can rely upon Graham v. Connor? His answer was, well, can I see that? Which told me that he didn't know what was in the manual.
No doubt. Well, he also admitted he'd never been through taser training.
Right. And so I showed it to him. And so then I started asking him a lot of questions about what it said. I asked him to read it out loud. And he started getting cute by not reading everything, and then also by trying to say, which is exactly why this was wrong. And what he didn't understand, getting back to the totality of the circumstances, he doesn't understand what totality of the circumstances is
To begin with.
Wow. Because it includes the severity of the crime. He had to acknowledge that's being investigated, he had to acknowledge that a domestic violence call is one of the most severe threatening situations.
Been that way since I got on.
Oh, yeah. And he had to admit that a lot of officers have been killed responding to domestic
I
violence
had friends killed.
We know, some of those people I've represented, and your friends.
Yeah.
And he had to acknowledge that the kidnapping of a child is one of the most serious things. And that's what the key card indicated, that there was domestic violence, kidnapping of a child. He had to acknowledge that this was close to Thanksgiving and that the supervisors told people in roll call, and it was on the body cameras, that be careful because
Of that time of the year.
This time of year when people get into child custody disputes that
But David Sifuentes and I talked about that, his mindset, because we get these calls and we always try to get ahead of it because we have to prepare. You should be. If you're an officer that's not and you roll up to a call with your head up your ass, you probably should find another profession, and because you're just rolling the dice and getting ready to get your ass handed to you. But we always get the ball, our minds going about how do I get ahead of this, and obviously to protect myself. That should be first and foremost. I wouldn't have leaned on, and based on what I saw of the calls, that it was a domestic. I'm not saying I would have thought of it, but it very well could be an actual kidnapping in progress, right? Which maybe the lady doesn't know this guy, or whoever it is or whatever. So, and that's bad enough. Domestic
you have to be prepared for both scenarios.
For both sides, but they're both really bad. We just described how domestics are bad enough, but then you have a total stranger that's trying to take a child from somebody. That's we got a true kidnapping in progress. Not a domestic custody battle, so to speak. But I think it's also important to note when we talk about the tasers and what Officer Vargas did, and I don't believe I mentioned this, we talked a little bit about it with David Sifuentes, was that this guy made some decisions that aren't necessarily trained in a bullet gun. Like, I do know, because I've been through taser training, I didn't carry one, is that the taser is a less lethal intermediate weapon, is what it is. It falls just after what we call hard hands. So we're able to strike, according to the use of force continuum, I'm able to strike, punch, kick, whatever, before I go to a taser, is the way it's supposed to run. But this officer had the right to express and threaten the use of deadly force because he believed a felony was in progress. He has the guy at gunpoint after he evaded arrest in a vehicle, and then based on what he saw, wasn't 100% sure that he didn't have a weapon, he transitions to his taser at the time. Now, the manual and what it used to be, maybe it's changed by now, that you only use a taser and transition to a taser or introduce a taser if you have lethal covered. So Officer Vargas is by himself, and you can't be both. You can't be lethal cover according to the manual, So you can't be with a gun and a taser in one hand, is what we talked about. So he made the decision on his own because I know that expert, whoever that guy was for the city, Miller, said that he should have held him at gunpoint for God knows how long, until cover arrived. And we've already said that so many things could have happened during that time. I mean, and this isn't a family podcast, but I've said the smart ass thing. I said, if they're doing what Miller suggested, and he's sitting there holding him, and this guy decided, my nuts itch, and he reaches towards his waistband, he gets shot. Because the officer can articulate, the excessiveness of the situation, right?
Correct.
I'm being a smartass about it, but that's just too long for him to do something stupid that gets him shot. And then, of course, it's even worse if the officer shoots someone that isn't armed,
Right. And I'm sure you noticed that Miss LaCanta in her award said that it was admirable that Vargas had the presence of mind to transition from his pistol to his taser.
Sure.
In accordance with his training, so he had the ability to use less than lethal. Now, I think it's important to understand a couple of things about taser, if you're okay with this, is that I think tasers gets a bad name because of media hype. But what the SAPD Academy does is it requires officers who want to be taser certified to be tased themselves.
Yeah.
It requires officers who want to carry OC spray to be sprayed themselves.
I've been sprayed.
And
I would much rather get tased than sprayed.
exactly. And the reason that the Academy teaches this thing, it requires people to experience these things is so the officer can make an intelligent choice about what less than lethal option to use. Now, he could have used his baton potentially, but he would have caused serious bruises, and there's no assurance that he would have succeeded. And a baton requires close combat, where there's always the potential to lose your deadly force pistol. So the taser was the best option to choose. And what people don't understand is that if you close a certain distance, the taser no longer becomes effective. And this person was advancing.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Advancing, and if he advanced
You need to spread.
you wouldn't have had the separation. And so it was the correct choice. It was the correct choice.
Let me say something to that, which you just brought up about the taser and his good decision making to transition from that. And then you talked about the baton, because I mentioned that because the baton falls on under hard hands too, and hard hands is punches, kicks, and elbows and things like that. And like we said, in the use of force continuum, and I don't even know if they call it continuum anymore. They might call it a matrix now,
Right.
or whatever, because they always change the name to suit the political, crybabies. But so they don't want, and a supervisor one time when I was still in the department from the academy, in the supervisor from the tactics unit there, our section, it was a sidebar he and I were talking about, a good friend. So he trusted me enough to say this. Of course, I won't mention his name, because we were talking about tasers. Number one, tasers are not 100% effective, okay? You have to hit them, just like you talked about, you have to have the right spread, but if you have too much of a spread and you miss them with a prong, then you might as well have just missed altogether, because the taser doesn't work with one prong. So that's hard. On a moving target, that's very difficult. The other thing is, some people have kind of fought through them and have been able to pull the probes out at that point. Now you just pissed them off, So had he pulled out his baton and struck this guy, they wouldn't have liked it, because punching and striking people, remember what we talked about with Parrish, the optics and how's the public going to view it, and the department view it as you being violent,
Right.
and excessive.
And I have represented people who have used batons as the intermediate weapon. And when they succeed in subduing the person after repeated baton strikes and struggling and handcuffing the person, they do experience cardiac arrest and die, and you have a custodial arrest. So by not...
And you have to be target specific
right.
with the baton.
And so avoiding the use of the baton, actually, in my view, prevents the risk of cardiac arrest if in a prolonged struggle. And one of the things that the Academy teaches, and I don't know if you want to elaborate on this, is that when officers engage in prolonged struggle, there's a better chance that they're going to lose in combat, have their deadly force weapon taken away from them, and then die. And that has happened
Sure.
to SAPD officers.
Sure. And I was always one, I never got investigated for excessive use of force. I used a lot of force, injurious force, to include deadly force, but articulated it enough, and obviously to match, if there were body cams or any kind of video around, that my force matched the resistance that was occurring. But what happens with officers, and I'm not talking about any specific officer particularly, but it is general. A lot of them don't know how to fight. They're not used to that. And it's getting worse because they stopped boxing in the academy. A lot of them have never been punched. That's why they boxed when I was in the academy, I had to box. Hell, I didn't bring it up, but I boxed David Spansky. He was one of them. I won't say who won, but.
So one of the things that I want to address that tangentially relates to not using hard force is that this person never complained of injury to EMS,
right,
or
who arrived,
or the jail. And Dr. Bucks made a note of that. And what is baffling to me is that IA never made an effort to obtain those records.
No, really.
We had to obtain those records by getting an order from the arbitrator that we needed the evidence and issued a subpoena duces tecum for the jail records and for the fire department records. And of course, the fire department records showed that he wasn't injured. The jail records showed that he wasn't injured. And there's no effort. When a department is going to be sued for any use of force, they better
call the medical
they
records.
better be sure to obtain medical records, whether there's injury or not, because you want to document the absence of injury if you are sued.
So it's important to note, good, very, very good point. Important to note, they're alleging excessive force on which led to the firing and termination of Officer Vargas. EMS arrived to assess him that night, right?
Yes.
And they didn't find anything wrong with him. So obviously he was able to go to jail and be transported by the officers. He gets to the magistrate's office, and magistrate has their own medical personnel to assess them, because if they complain about something, then they get assessed through that. Apparently he stayed in jail, right? Didn't go to the hospital from there.
Correct.
Okay, so there's no injuries there. And it was only until after Internal Affairs solicited him, the suspect, right, to
Correct.
complain on the officer. So back in my day, Internal Affairs used to be called headhunters. Now, lucky for me, I didn't have too many of those. Okay, I had a lot of good supervisors and sergeants there. Some really cool ones in Internal Affairs. But that is headhunting, is it not?
Yes, and if I can digress a little bit, back in 1988, I was in the Special Crimes Unit of the DA's office, and lots of use of force cases came over to the DA's office. And I started noticing that people were lying to Internal Affairs to get out of their criminal troubles or to sue the city.
The suspects?
So one of the cases that was just very, very egregious, this individual that was arrested for rape claimed that the officer did all kinds of crazy stuff. And I told my supervisor, I believe this is a lie. We should go after it for aggravated perjury. And no one had ever done that before.
No.
And he said, "You really think so?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Okay, well, this is what you need to do." He told me, "You need to get a grand jury subpoena for the medical records from the jail." And I had a trial partner who was a nurse that says, "Oh yeah, all the nurses remember people that are," she didn't use the word jerk, but she used another word. Nurses remember
asshole
people that are jerks. So let's interview the nurse as well. And sure enough, the nurse that interviewed and remembered he was a jerk, and he never complained of any injuries that you would expect. So I called up Internal Affairs and said, "Hey, my boss told me to ask you guys to serve this grand jury subpoena. Will you do it?" And they were shocked. They did it.
They did it. That's
amazing.
They
did it. And so Internal Affairs knows from institutional knowledge how to get medical records.
Sure.
If they want. They can have a HIPAA release or whatever, and it's important to get these.
No doubt.
So they failed to get this. So one of the things that...
But you tell me why that. You think that was intentional or just poor investigation?
I think that the investigator didn't think it was going to result in termination, and didn't
from Internal Affairs.
Didn't make the effort. It could also be lack of experience or lack of knowledge. I don't know. But one of the things that in terms of organizational theory that comes to my mind is that you would expect that information is done, where a complete investigation is done, and that evidence is provided to the chief, because the process assures that there's a complete, fair investigation. You would expect that. And
That's a part of what?
well, it's part of, in my view, it's called good governance. It's due process. It's good organizational theory, that you have management where not only do you have a rational decision maker, but you have processes in place that assure good outcomes. Now, in my view, and you can get to this later if you wish, but in my view, the department pays lip service to process, they pay lip service to values, and it doesn't matter that you have values or processes if you don't follow it, because what happened in this case is there was complete failure to adequately investigate, and Chief McManus didn't really review much of anything.
Which is what the arbitrator said.
Right. And historically, McManus never does review what's there. He uses the default of getting into issues of transparency and good governance, is he never keeps notes of how he decides. There's no record of anything that he decides. You know, you, Willie, as an officer, are required to have a body camera on all important decisions. There's no similar mechanism in place for the chief to document how he makes his important decisions.
Are those below him in administration, right?
Right. And so what he says in arbitration, well, somebody showed it to me, the videos, and if we want full transparency, if we want full accountability, there is a web-based software called evidence.com that all body cameras are uploaded.
I've worked with it many times.
And the beauty of evidence.com is if someone logs in with their username, you can see when they logged in, what they viewed, and if they want to bookmark or mark a part of the video and put comments, they can document what they viewed, why they found it disturbing, and they can transcribe these body camera videos. The IA investigator didn't do that, didn't transcribe the videos. You know, we have cases that I'm not going to talk about right now, but we transcribed these videos, and that's when we found that the mother showed up. And what was surprising to me was you have a Hispanic mother that knew her daughter-in-law, knew her grandchild, and when the suspect sees mother shows up, and excuse my language, this is what he actually said, "Oh fuck, my mom's here."
Yeah.
So then mom proceeds to talk to him and chews him out, saying, "I taught you better, you need to get over your obsession with this woman." And he doesn't complain about any injury. He says that these officers are acting all badass, and the mother says, "Well, when you act like a fool, they can." And
I remember that.
And says to him that,
Good mommy.
says basically that you should be at home in bed getting ready for ready for work, as opposed to in the back of a patrol car.
And apparently this had been going on, so she had told him, "Hey, just leave her alone."
Right.
You know, and because knew that this was going to happen. That's what I took it as.
So let's link this up to what happened in the totality of the circumstances. You know, this individual had circled around the parking lot 4 times when the officer turned on his overheads. And the chief didn't even know that he had turned on his overheads. And on one of the passes, he almost T-boned the officer.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the ultimate pass, when the officer reversed, it was a game of chicken, and there was almost a head-on collision.
Just T-boned it.
So when McManus says, "Oh, look at this freeze frame. He's got his hands to his side. He's not resisting," you're totally ignoring what transpired.
You talked about.
You totally ignore what transpired beforehand. And the mother, by telling the son, you got to get over your obsession, is basically telling everyone and
suicide
and to the chief that no, you got to look at the totality of the circumstance. This guy's a pighead who's determined to get his way and can't accept reality. And for the chief to suggest he was just had, hey, what's going on? You know, like, hey, bro, let's have a chummy talk.
But that's not a position of surrender. It's almost like a ruse,
right?
You know, a position of surrender would be what he told you to do.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly, and that's one of the things that people in tactics have said is that sometimes when you are deciding to engage in combat, how many training videos have you seen where someone has, trying to distract an officer and act like it, and
all
then
the time.
and
I've had him do it.
Before you know it,
I've
the
had him do
officer's
it.
under deadly attack.
I've had him do it. I mean, not necessarily a deadly attack, but either run or tried something else. But one thing that the mind
But you've seen those videos.
But one thing that people don't understand when we talk about domestics, and then now that we know mom showed up, the severity of it, they've been having this problem, and obviously she doesn't want anything to do with them, and now a baby's involved. So you can only imagine the emotion that's going through this guy. So if he's amped up,
right
now imagine at that moment that he realizes that I'm screwed, and you know what, my life means nothing, and I'm going to show her, because they always want to do it, and he wants to get shot.
Right. And mother,
because he's got the mechanism to do it.
Mother actually employs daughter-in-law. She's the employer, daughter-in-law,
okay.
so she knows both sides of the story.
100%.
And what's interesting, and I'm not going to use the name of the child, but what's interesting is that on the body camera of one of the female officers that's there towards the end, the child says to the female officer, he was trying to steal me. So,
and did the chief see that?
He didn't even know that.
Oh my God.
He did not even know that.
How does he not understand the severity of the whole situation?
So that goes to the totality of the circumstances. If Vargas was responding to a call that had as its genesis, he was trying to steal me.
He was right.
Yes. And one of the basic things of any investigation is who, what, where, when, and why, and how. Now, why is not limited to a microsecond that's freeze-framed in a video. The why has to, how did the person get involved in the police response? And it starts with the calls for 911.
Yeah, it's not like he was driving around doing proactive activity,
and what
which very well could have happened. He could have seen the disturbance, but it wouldn't have mattered about the calls because it could have been coupled with calls coming around. Not to mention, I've had situations where I'm struggling with the suspect. I'm by myself, and the calls start coming in that I'm in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Because they notice that I'm by myself and I'm having problems. A lot of good Samaritans out there that you've talked about.
Oh, lots of good Samaritans, and I use that phrase in my brief, a good Samaritan, because one of the good Samaritans, and I, at the moment, I can't remember her name, but one of the good Samaritans, when Vargas was at the ice shack across the street, and he started going across, he went across because he saw a woman run towards him.
Yeah, and he didn't know that was the victim or someone else.
And so when he saw this person running towards him, he thought, this
without a baby,
this could be the person that was needing police assistance.
And the baby's gone.
And so he talks to her, and that good Samaritan points to the Jeep, and the moment she points to the Jeep takes off.
Yeah.
So that's almost an accusation.
I've had those
and an admission.
I've had those situations, and I remember the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm the feeling I had was based on my experience at the time. I can't speak for just a little bit of what Vargas was experiencing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I
Let
want to.
me do one of these things. Hand me your phone, and I just want to illustrate something. If citizens, there were about 5 or 6 citizens in the parking lot, they saw everything that was going on. If they saw everything that was going on and they believed that the officers were being brutal,
That'd be calls.
no. I'm going to tell you this. They would have started doing this.
Oh yeah.
Filming police brutality. The opportunity to
I'm
film
surprised that they weren't filming anyway, whether they thought it was police brutality or
the
not.
opportunity to film police brutality. No. They were perfectly fine with what the police did. And so was the ex, because she was present when this individual was acting up, when supposedly the abuse happened.
Yeah.
And she told Sendejo that when he gets like this, his eyes go dark,
Yeah, I read that.
and explained to Sendejo that when he's upset and angry and resentful and jealous and controlling, that there's no reasoning to him. Rationale. And one of the things that you said, Willie, is that body cameras can't capture certain things. One of the things that I'm sure you've seen is the 1,000-yard stare.
Oh yeah.
And that's the oh my God, this is going to be bad.
Wasn't I talking about that?
The
The loom. It's a loom.
that
you know.
that a body camera at night,
No, you won't pick it up.
you won't pick it up at all.
But I've also, again, and I'm no fortune teller, soothsayer, anything like that. But I got very in tune with my senses, and there's an energy. It's a bad feeling energy that you get. I've had these people and they look at you and it's ugly. It's an ugly feeling at that point. It didn't make me frightened. It put me in fear of what they might do. So therefore I acted, accordingly to my training, everything that I'm justified to do. But they're not training these officers that way anymore. They're training them to not to be in fear. They're training them to be afraid. And fear and fright are two different things. When you're in fright, you're frightened. You do stupid things. And if you're not trained on how to react to any kind of force implemented upon you, knowing how to strike, fight, in particular, anything like that. I know jiu-jitsu and all these other things come into play. Or you have these restrictions of what they might deem as a chokehold. You know what I mean? The officer, then he is put in fright. And they do stupid things. And I always say, we've always talked about this mental toolbox that we have up here, and it's hypothetical. But when an officer is in this struggle, he's reaching into his mental toolbox. What do I do? What do I do? How would I do? And when there's nothing to grasp, then it makes their excitement even more.
Right.
And when you talk about going dark, an officer can go dark. They can go into condition black with their mentality, and then they lose it all. And you don't recover from it if you live. I mean, you recover from it if you live through it.
Right.
You may end up being killed with that. But let's finish up with this. And what I want to finish up with is your take on this whole situation here, and from what we know about the chief not being informed of all of the facts based on the totality of the circumstances, going in, almost fabricating. And I believe it is a fabrication of a charge of excessive force to fire this officer on because he didn't get the result from the initial 2 charges. They asked for an extension, and during that extension is when they throw the excessive force, which actually just adds more drama to that allegation. Why do you think this chief did that? Is it ignorance? Is it ineptitude? Is he managing by paranoia that he's going to get, berated by the anti-police crybabies? What is it?
So let me first give a caveat and then answer it twofold.
Sure.
The caveat is, and we've talked about this before today, Willie, is that I believe this case would actually be an excellent case study for interdisciplinary analysis by a business school a government school, psychology, sociology, police, and law school to talk about how the decision was made. We could talk about this forever.
You can pull so many things out of it.
It gets into evidence, it gets into law, it gets into labor relationships, good management, and so forth. Having said that, I will address two things. I think one of the sad things about politicians is they rule by public information office. And
well, tell me which politician are you talking about?
so they're every one of them. It doesn't matter whether it's Republican or Democrat, city or county.
I mean,
state
what
or federal.
I'm taking from what you just said is the chief is a politician.
Correct.
Okay.
So, and what politicians and public information officers do is they don't inform the public. They spin. They put out propaganda. They control information. And what public information should be is about transparency. There is not transparency. That is avoided here. So that's one thing. Then what we see is the phenomena of the movie Scarface, the bad guy scene. And this gets back to public information office. In the movie, there's the bad guy scene where they're in a fancy restaurant and people in tuxedos are looking at Scarface, Tony Montano, because he's screaming and yelling and acting up. And he's upset that people are looking at him and says, "What you looking at? You know, oh, you're saying look at the bad guy. Well, you need people like me so you can feel good about yourself. So you're the bad guy."
No doubt.
So what happened in this case?
Great analogy.
What happened in this case is that Vargas was a good guy.
Yeah.
He was a good guy. He did what was expected. He served his community. He was responsive to the citizens that called 911. He was responsive to the mother of the child and the child herself. So he was a good guy on every...
There's the hero that people talk about
Right.
police officers being.
But they wanted to make him a bad guy so they could feel good about themselves and do spend. So, you know, Willie, I'm glad that you have invited me to speak. I wish we could talk about this more.
Oh, yeah.
It deserves a lot more.
Sure.
And I don't know where you're planning to go with this, but one of the things that I think is important is that if change is going to happen, people need to let the city council members know, the city manager know, that this type of decision making is not acceptable. And so maybe in the future you can address that.
Well, what I'm trying to do, Ben, and I'm just a lowly retired detective, you know, but I have I think a very colorful background in law enforcement. I believe I have a good grasp, which allows me to be able to talk about these things, you know, especially in situations that involve force or police action. But what I'm trying to do is just get this word out, and everything that you said, and I want to thank you so much for stepping up, you offered this. I did solicit it. We talked about it a little bit because you and I talk about other things too, but you offered that because I was like, even better to have you on the show. But my deal is to talk about it enough that people start noticing. And that's what we were just talking about it earlier, that people are listening that I don't know. And I'm not making any money off this. You know, this is something that what I found out eventually, and especially after having David Sifuentes on, it's very somewhat therapeutic for them because they have this angst to discuss these actions that they've seen. And David is particularly because he was in upper management. So he's behind the curtains.
Well, I want to commend you for doing what you have done. And I think that you have initiated something that my hope, and you know, maybe as we see how things develop, this can grow. My hope is to see, there's a former deputy chief that's a professor at St. Mary's. And my hope is that he can convince St. Mary's to put on an interdisciplinary course where
That's a good idea.
where I, and others that have expertise can say, look, this is a problem. How do we address it? And what's the solution? Because we can complain all day,
Yeah.
and there may be no solution. But, my hope is that it be addressed non-emotional in a very scholarly, factual way, which you're doing, and say, okay, this is insane. Let's do something rational. Let's bring about a change.
I mean,
This shouldn't happen again.
well, and I'm wondering, and I don't want to go too much further into this, but I'm wondering if the chief actually accomplished the goal he set out to do, because it's not about the end result; it's about the noise he makes up here and who he satiates. Because whenever an officer gets involved in something like this, something newsworthy, and you mentioned this before, you talk about telling the story. They don't tell the story; they tell a story.
Yeah.
You said
Correct.
yeah, public information. They create a story aside from the true facts.
They spin it.
They spin it, and here we are, 4 years, 4 months later, and everything, all the details come out in the wash, and they're put in the right context and articulately, professionally, and educatedly by someone like yourself. And this is what happened. You put it all out on the table. This is what went down. In the end, he did not do even close to what they alleged him to do. And I've seen this on other cases. Okay, we give him his job back. Did he really win?
Exactly. What's interesting is that I have talked to chiefs after they retired, Ortiz and others.
Not Philippus, because he didn't like you.
and
You know what I'm talking about. You should get under his skin. I like Philippus. I mean,
Gibson. And both of them have told me that, after it's all said and done and my officer gets his job back or gets his back pay, I'm glad. And I have no grudge against you because you did your job. I want someone fighting for the officer. But I don't see that
happening anymore, right?
There's a malice in what happens.
I think the malice is that that makes them look bad at the beginning, because ultimately it is his subordinate and all that. But Ben, thank you so much.
Willie.
We talked about a bunch, and I appreciate working with you.
Yes.
This was awesome. That was a great idea about what you said about this retired deputy chief. We'll talk about it with him.
Willie, anytime you need support or help, let me know. I'll make time and I'll be back.
Sure. I'll say this. Ben didn't expect this, and I'm doing it as a friend, and actually I work with Ben sometimes. Officers, if you get in any trouble and you need a good arbitrator, attorney, or even a defense attorney for whatever, because he does everything, I highly recommend him. Have other attorneys, and everybody has a different fit for whatever. But Ben has been around the majority of my 33-year career, and he's always treated me exactly the same. We kind of have a connection through my dad. He knew my father, who's now deceased. But you around certain people enough, you get a feel for him. Ben and I don't hang out. We've had lunch together and things like that. But I know that he really, really fights for the officers' well-being and their livelihoods. I know that. And he's been successful majority of the time. I won't ask you how often or whatever, but I do know from what I heard, he's been very successful. So there's my take. Do you want to say anything to that?
Sure. My father taught me a lot of values, and so did my mother. And I had an uncle that was Austin's most decorated officer. And all three of those have shaped my attitude about how to treat people in law enforcement. My father never abided bullies. He always was for the little guy. And when I was a prosecutor, I saw how police officers, despite the fact that people think that they arrest people, we're trying to protect a little person, the victim of crime. I think what's getting lost in today's society is that police are trying to protect the little guy. My mother, I was able to tell her before she passed that the thing that I got from her was she was a bull, and my tenacity comes from her. And she laughed and enjoyed hearing that. And from my uncle, the most decorated officer on the Austin PD, he told me that I had a good education, I was intelligent, and those are things that would help me be a good lawyer. But until I had the humility to learn from a street cop, I would never be good as a lawyer. And so Willie and many, many other officers have constantly been involved in my continuing education to improve my skills. And so I'm grateful to people such as Willie and many, many others,
Bobby Moreno.
who educate me. Ben Lively.
Oh yeah.
Lots of people have educated me on, I would be remiss in not saying all the people, but there's just been so many that have educated me over the years, and I'm grateful for that.